We need younger talent who will work for half your salary, Michael. Brandon Cole, the new regional director at Innovatech Solutions here in Denver, didn't mince words. He delivered the blow bluntly from across his polished glass desk. You're just too expensive for where we're headed. My name is Michael Evans, 50 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the senior client relations executive. 15 years I'd spent meticulously building their client portfolio from the ground up, nurturing relationships that were the bedrock of Innovatech's success. And just like that, it all culminated in an 8-minute conversation. Honestly, I'd seen it coming for months. Ever since Brandon, all of 34 and draped in tailored suits that probably cost more than my first car, took the helm. The corporate buzzwords started flying. Restructuring, modernization, cost-cutting. Whispers that usually signaled an experienced head was about to roll. He had this way of talking about disruption like it was a new latte flavor. During meetings, he'd glance at me, not with dislike, but with a distinct air of impatience, as if I were an old rotary phone in a room gleaming with the latest smartphones. Still functional, sure, but an outdated relic. Stick around with Life Stories to hear how this unexpected turn wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. Don't forget to subscribe. The market's changing, Michael, Brandon continued, his gaze barely lifting from my personnel file, a document summarizing a decade and a half of dedication. We need people who understand digital natives, social media engagement. You know how it is. And I did know. I just didn't agree that it was the only way, or even the best way for the kind of deep-rooted partnerships I'd cultivated. I thought of Robert Sterling at Apex Industries, how we'd navigated those production delays that nearly bankrupted him, restructuring his entire payment schedule over one frantic weekend. I remembered Eleanor Vance from Summit Enterprises, how I personally delivered her contract extension after her husband passed, ensuring business worries wouldn't add to her grief. These weren't algorithm-driven solutions. They were human connections, built on trust and countless hours on the phone, hundreds of in-person meetings. But Brandon wasn't interested in those anecdotes. He saw my salary and envisioned 2 younger, cheaper hires. I understand completely, I said, extending my hand. A flicker of relief crossed his face. My calmness clearly surprised him. He even thanked me for my professionalism. As I packed up my office that afternoon, a small box for 15 years of work, Sarah from accounting, who'd been with the company almost as long as I had, hovered by the doorway. You okay, Michael? She asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. I'm fine, Sarah, I replied, and surprisingly, I meant it. They don't know what they're doing, she whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. Brandon's got the board convinced he's some kind of visionary. I just nodded, continuing to empty my desk. What neither of them realized was that my mind wasn't dwelling on anger or resentment. It was already 3 steps ahead. While Brandon was dissecting spreadsheets, I was recalling direct phone numbers, personal promises, and a legion of clients who, when they needed something, didn't call Innovatech Solutions. They called Michael Evans. I joined Innovatech when it was still Pioneer Tech Services, just 3 employees crammed into a windowless office, fueled more by ambition than actual clients. George Maxwell ran the place back then, a grizzled former sales guy who lived by the mantra, business is built on relationships, not transactions. People sign contracts with people, Mike, not companies. Remember that. And I did. For 15 years, those words were my compass. My cell phone held more direct client lines than the company directory. My dedication had come at a personal cost, though. My marriage to Laura had ended 8 years prior, partly because Innovatech's growth often took precedence over our own. My daughter, Emily, saw me mostly on weekends and holidays during her high school years. Now 23, she understood things a bit better. She was, in fact, the first person I called after that meeting with Brandon. They did what? Her outrage was immediate and fierce. It's business, Em, I said, the single cardboard box of my office life beside me on the passenger seat. The new director wants his own team. After everything you've done for them? Dad, that's just wrong. She wasn't wrong, but being right wasn't my focus. What came next was... The writing had been on the wall for months. George retired last year, selling his majority stake to investors who'd initially promised to maintain the company culture. 6 months later, Brandon arrived with his slick presentations and MBA jargon. Suddenly, our quarterly meetings were saturated with terms like market penetration and client acquisition cost. Relationships were rarely mentioned. 3 weeks ago, I'd walked past the conference room and overheard Brandon talking to someone from HR. The legacy staff compensation is out of alignment with industry standards, he'd said, especially in client relations. Legacy staff, a relic. That's what I'd become. I went back to my office, but instead of the company CRM, I pulled up my personal contact list. Names, numbers, 15 years of meticulously kept notes about kids' graduations, vacation homes, favorite restaurants, details you couldn't just download. Then I'd made a call to Chris Miller, an old colleague who'd left Pioneer Tech 5 years earlier to join Sterling and Ross, a competitor. We'd stayed in touch, grabbing lunch every few months. "How's Sterling and Ross treating you, Chris?" I'd asked casually. "Growing fast, Mike," he'd replied. "Actually, we were just talking about expanding the client relations team." I remembered smiling. That's good to know. So, the day Brandon finally called me into his office to deliver the news, I already had Chris Miller's offer letter sitting in my email inbox. 3 days after being unceremoniously let go from Innovatech, I found myself in the parking lot of the Red Rocks Country Club. It was just before 2 p.m., and I watched as Brandon Cole's expensive sedan pulled into a prime spot. He was meeting Robert Sterling from Apex Industries, my biggest client for the past decade, for a tea time. From my car, I could see them shake hands. Brandon's gestures overly enthusiastic, Robert's smile polite but visibly reserved. That's when the full weight of Brandon's strategy, or lack thereof, truly hit me. He wasn't just replacing me. He genuinely believed he could simply step into my shoes, that the intricate web of client relationships I'd spent 15 years weaving could be transferred like data files on a server. Meeting by meeting, handshake by handshake, he planned to insert himself into connections built on years of shared history and mutual trust. As I watched them walk towards the first tee, a profound sense of clarity, not anger, settled over me. I started my car and drove straight to Sterling and Ross's downtown Denver office. Chris Miller met me in the lobby, a look of surprise on his face. "Mike, I thought you were taking a week to think about our offer," he said. "I'm done thinking, Chris," I replied, "but I want to modify the terms." In the conference room, with Rebecca Sterling, one of the firm's named partners, now present, I laid out my requirements. Complete autonomy over client onboarding, the authority to structure my own team, and crucially, a clear understanding that Sterling and Ross would not attempt to enforce any non-compete clauses Innovatech might try to wave around concerning my former clients. Chris Miller listened intently, then Rebecca spoke. "You're essentially asking to bring your client base with you, Michael," she stated, her gaze steady. "I'm not asking to take anything that isn't already mine in spirit," I responded. "These relationships exist because of 15 years of dedicated work. The contracts might technically belong to Innovatech, but the trust, Rebecca, belongs to me." She studied me for a long moment, a silence that felt heavier than it probably was, then gave a decisive nod. "Make it happen, Michael, and the terms are yours." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh legal pad and my phone before me. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt purposeful. This wasn't about revenge against Brandon Cole or Innovatech. It was about respect. Respect for the work I'd poured my life into and the promises I'd always kept. Emily called while I was meticulously making my list. "How are you doing, Dad? Really?" I paused, considering her question. "Better than expected, Em," I told her honestly. "Sometimes you need to get pushed out of a place to see where you actually belong." "So what's next?" she asked. "I'm starting over," I said, looking down at the 10 names circled on the page. "But not from scratch." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting emails. Not to the clients themselves, not yet. My first point of contact was their executive assistants, the gatekeepers, the people who truly controlled access, individuals I had always treated with the same courtesy and respect as the executives they supported. Would you please let Mr. Mizishkini, client name, know I've moved to a new position at Sterling & Ross? My emails read. I'd appreciate the opportunity to update them personally when they have a moment. No pressure, no aggressive sales pitch, just the straightforward truth. By midnight, I had responses from 7 of them. Each carried the same essential message. They want to hear from you, Michael. I closed my laptop and slept more soundly than I had in months. Tomorrow would be day 1 of showing Brandon Cole and Innovatech exactly what they had so carelessly thrown away. My first call the next morning was directly to Robert Sterling at Apex Industries. No assistant screening, straight to his cell. Michael, I was wondering when I'd hear from you, he said, his voice tinged with genuine relief. Had a golf meeting with your replacement yesterday. Spent 4 hours listening to him talk about synergy and optimization, and not once did he ask about my daughter's upcoming graduation, something you always remembered. That's partly why I'm calling, Rob, I said. I've moved to Sterling & Ross, but this isn't a sales call. If you're happy with Innovatech, that's genuinely all that matters to me. The silence on the other end lasted only a second. Send me the paperwork, Michael, he said firmly. We follow you. By the end of that first week, I'd had similar conversations with 6 other key clients. No hard sell, no desperate pleas, just honesty about my new position and an open invitation. They could come if they wanted. They all wanted to. It was Eleanor Vance from Summit Enterprises who first warned me about the inevitable pushback. Your old company called yesterday, Michael, she said, her tone concerned. Some rather aggressive young man named Brandon Cole. He claimed you were in breach of contract, that clients couldn't legally follow you. I thanked her for the heads up and immediately called Chris, who connected me with Sterling & Ross's legal team. They confirmed what I already suspected. Brandon was bluffing. My employment contract with Innovatech had a standard non-solicitation clause, but nothing that prevented clients from choosing to follow me of their own volition, especially if I wasn't the one initiating the switch with a direct pitch to break their existing contracts. As long as you're not actively poaching them with offers to undercut Innovatech while they're still under contract, you're clean, the lawyer assured me. The next morning, I arrived at my new, albeit still sparsely decorated office at Sterling & Ross to find an email from Brandon Cole. The subject line was stark: cease and desist. The message was predictable. Threats of litigation, accusations of client interference, demands that I immediately return all proprietary client information. It ended with a thinly veiled offer to discuss terms of settlement before this escalates further. I printed it out and handed it to Chris. Chris Miller read Brandon Cole's email, a thin, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He's panicking, Chris observed, handing the printout back to me. The Innovatech board must be asking some very pointed questions by now. 7 major clients don't just walk away in a week without ruffling some serious feathers. He doesn't understand what's happening, I replied, shaking my head. He genuinely thinks I've stolen something, like a physical asset. He can't grasp that these are relationships, not database entries. That afternoon, my personal cell phone rang. It was Sarah, my former colleague from Innovatech's accounting department, her voice a hushed whisper. They're in full meltdown mode here, Michael, she confirmed. Brandon's been in emergency meetings with the board all day. They're throwing around terms like client retention bonuses and emergency outreach programs. And get this, he actually told them you hacked the CRM to get client information. I couldn't help but laugh at that accusation. Sarah, you know I've probably never even logged into their new CRM system. My contacts were always in my head and my personal notes. I know. That's why I'm calling, she continued, a note of urgency in her voice. They're bringing in an outside cybersecurity firm to audit all system activity, specifically looking for unauthorized data extraction. When they don't find anything, they'll have to admit you didn't steal a thing. Exactly, I finished for her. But Michael, please be careful, Sarah warned. her voice dropping even lower. Brandon is scared. He promised the board he could slash costs without losing a single key client. Now he's lost 7 in less than a week. And from what I hear, these are big ones. Desperate people do desperate things. After hanging up with Sarah, I immediately called Rebecca Sterling and updated her on the situation, including the impending IT audit at Innovatech and Brandon's increasingly erratic behavior. She wasn't particularly concerned about the legal threats, dismissing them as bluster, but she was undeniably impressed by the rapid and seamless client transfers. 7 major accounts in 5 days, Michael, she said, a note of admiration in her voice. Without a single formal sales presentation from our side. I've been in this business a long time, and I've never seen anything quite like it. It's not about sales presentations, Rebecca, I reiterated. It's about trust, built over years. Just as I was packing up to leave for the day, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. This is Brandon Cole. We should talk in person. Tomorrow 9 a.m. at the Daily Grind Cafe downtown. This doesn't need to get uglier. I showed the message to Chris, who immediately advised against the meeting. He's desperate, Mike. Don't give him any ammunition. He'll probably try to twist whatever you say. But I disagreed. I want to hear what he has to say, Chris. Let him talk. The next morning, I arrived at the Daily Grind Cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a quiet table in the back with a clear view of the entrance. Brandon walked in at precisely 9:05 a.m., his eyes scanning the busy cafe until he spotted me. His usual confident stride seemed a little less assured today, the tension visible in the set of his shoulders despite the expensive suit. "Thanks for coming, Michael," he said, sliding into the booth opposite me. His attempt at a collegial tone fell flat. "I think perhaps we got off on the wrong foot." I didn't respond, just waited, sipping my black coffee. "Look," he continued, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. "What would it take to stop this client exodus? The board is breathing down my neck. Whatever Sterling and Ross is paying you, Innovatech can match it. We can even discuss a significant signing bonus to welcome you back." And just like that, with that desperate offer, I knew I had him exactly where I needed him. "I'm not interested in coming back to Innovatech, Brandon," I said simply, my voice calm and even. Brandon's forced professional smile faltered. "Then what do you want? A consulting arrangement? Finder's fees for the accounts you're influencing?" I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence hang for a moment. "You still don't get it, do you, Brandon? This isn't about money." "Everything's about money, Michael," he replied, a flash of his old arrogance returning, his certainty absolute. "That's business 101. "And that's precisely why you're losing," I countered, setting my cup down firmly. "Those clients aren't following me because Sterling and Ross offered them better rates or flashier service packages. They're following me because for 15 years, I answered their calls on Saturday mornings. I remembered their kids' names and their wedding anniversaries. I treated them like valued partners, like people, not like account numbers on a spreadsheet." Brandon's expression hardened. "That's all very touching, Michael, but let's be practical here. Name your price to stop poaching our client list." "I haven't poached anyone, Brandon," I stated clearly. "I haven't breached any contracts. I simply let people know where I landed, and they made their own informed decisions." He leaned back, studying me, the frustration evident on his face. "The board isn't happy. They brought me in to modernize things, streamline costs, not to oversee the loss of millions in accounts virtually overnight." "And who did they blame when you told them about these departures?" I asked, watching him closely. His slight, almost imperceptible flinch told me everything I needed to know. "That's not relevant," he deflected. "Oh, I think it's highly relevant," I pressed, leaning forward. "Because I'm guessing you didn't tell them the truth. You didn't tell them that you fired the one person responsible for maintaining those crucial relationships without a shred of understanding of what that truly entailed. You didn't admit that you looked at my salary as a liability instead of recognizing it as an investment in client loyalty." Brandon's jaw tightened. They understand that necessary restructuring sometimes comes with temporary disruption. Is that what you call losing nearly 30% of your most stable revenue base in a single week, Brandon? Temporary disruption? I asked, my voice level but firm. The question, or rather the implied percentage, clearly hit home. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of genuine shock replacing the carefully constructed corporate facade. 30%? It's 7 clients, Michael. 7 clients who collectively represent nearly a third of Innovatech's annual billings, I clarified, drawing on the figures I knew like the back of my hand. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you were too busy scrutinizing salary spreadsheets instead of familiarizing yourself with client value reports. With the actual revenue streams these relationships generate, the color visibly drained from his face. I knew then, with certainty, that he had been selectively reporting the extent of the damage to the Innovatech board, likely downplaying the significance of the departed accounts. "How many more are at risk?" he asked, his voice now noticeably lower, the earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a raw, unveiled concern. "All of them," I stated honestly, without any hint of triumph. Every major client I personally handled for Innovatech over the past 15 years has reached out to me since my departure. I haven't even had to make the calls, Brandon. They've been calling me. He stared at me for a long, silent moment, the bustling sounds of the Daily Grind cafe fading into a dull hum. The implications of my statement were clearly sinking in. "What happens?" he finally said, his voice strained. "If I go back to the board and tell them you've been actively soliciting our clients, that you took proprietary information when you left?" "Then you'd be lying, Brandon," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze directly. "And your own IT audit, the one Sarah from accounting so kindly informed me about, will prove it. I didn't take a single document. I didn't download a single file. I didn't breach a single confidence. The only thing I took from Innovatech was 15 years of relationships that I built, personally, through hard work and genuine connection. You can't threaten me with falsehoods, Brandon. It won't work." He drew back slightly, as if I'd physically struck him. "How did you know about the IT audit?" he stammered, his composure crumbling. I just offered a small, knowing smile. "People talk to people they trust, Brandon. That's another fundamental aspect of this business you don't seem to understand." Just then, Brandon's phone buzzed insistently on the table between us. He glanced down at the screen, and whatever he saw caused a fresh wave of panic to flash across his face, a look he quickly tried to suppress. But I saw it. I need to take this," he said, standing abruptly, knocking his chair slightly. "We're not finished here, Michael." But as I watched him hurry outside, phone pressed to his ear, his voice urgent and agitated, I knew we were. Whatever was unfolding at Innovatech was accelerating far faster than he could possibly control. His carefully constructed world of spreadsheets and buzzwords was collapsing around him. Later that afternoon, back in my new office at Sterling & Ross, Chris Miller stopped by, a puzzled expression on his face. "You just got a call routed through the main line," he said, "from a George Maxwell. Isn't that your former boss, the one who founded Pioneer Tech Services before it became Innovatech?" "The one who retired last year, yes," I confirmed. "Former boss and former majority owner. Did he leave a number?" "Said you'd have it," Chris replied. He also said, and I'm quoting him directly here, "The Innovatech board called an emergency meeting. They want to talk to you yesterday." I nodded, a sense of inevitability washing over me. This wasn't entirely surprising. "Thank you, Chris." After Chris left, I leaned back in my chair, considering my next move. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place much faster than I had anticipated. George Maxwell wouldn't have called unless something truly significant was happening at Innovatech. He wasn't one for idle gossip. I picked up my phone and dialed his personal number, a number I still knew by heart. "They're in a full-blown panic, Michael," George said without any preamble the moment he answered, his voice gruff and familiar. "When the board finally realized exactly which clients had left, and the revenue associated with them, They called me in to ask what in the hell was going on. I leaned back further in my chair, a small smile playing on my lips. And what did you tell them, George? The unvarnished truth, he growled, that the primary reason Innovatech has enjoyed such a stable and lucrative client base for the past 15 years was standing right in front of them until they let him walk out the door. I told them you were worth every damn penny they paid you, and then some. I appreciate that, George. This isn't about appreciation, Michael, he retorted. It's about 15 years of solid work, of building something real, being flushed down the toilet by some kid who thinks business can be run entirely on algorithms and cost-cutting directives. The board wants an emergency session with you. They're asking if you'd consider coming back. I wasn't surprised by the offer, but it wasn't what I wanted. I'm settled at Sterling and Ross now, George, and quite happy here. With 7 of Innovatech's biggest clients already signed, and apparently more on the way, George noted dryly. Soon to be 10, actually, I admitted. 3 more are finalizing their paperwork with Sterling and Ross this week. A low whistle came through the phone. No wonder they're panicking. By my quick calculation, that's, what? Close to 46% of Innovatech's annual revenue about to walk out the door with you. Something like that, I confirmed. The line went quiet for a moment. You always did know everyone's numbers better than they knew them themselves, Michael, George finally said. Ski, a hint of reluctant admiration in his tone. So what's your play here? Because make no mistake, the board is ready to offer you Brandon Cole's job right now, probably with a hefty raise and a blank check, just to stop the bleeding. It was a tempting offer for about 3 seconds. Then I remembered Brandon's dismissive tone, the way he'd barely looked at me during that final, insulting meeting, how quickly 15 years of unwavering loyalty had been reduced to a mere line item on a cost-cutting spreadsheet. I'm not interested in his job, George, I said firmly, but I am interested in something else. Name it. A partnership arrangement, I proposed. Sterling and Ross and Innovatech. We establish a formal agreement for shared client services, focusing on accounts that would clearly benefit from the combined specialties and strengths of both firms. George Maxwell was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line, the cogs clearly turning. Let me get this straight, Michael, he finally said, his voice laced with a mixture of surprise and intrigue. You want the Innovatech board? The same people who are currently watching their company hemorrhage clients to your new firm, to authorize a partnership with the very company that's gutting their client list? I want them to recognize reality, George, I corrected gently but firmly. At the rate things are progressing, Innovatech won't have enough major clients left to sustain its current operational model within a few more months. They'll be forced into massive layoffs, or worse. But a strategic partnership could stabilize both companies. My clients, the ones who followed me, and the ones who might still be considering it, get the best of both worlds, the personalized service they trust from me, now backed by the expanded resources of Sterling and Ross, plus access to any unique specializations Innovatech still offers. Innovatech, in turn, keeps a significant portion of the revenue from these shared clients instead of losing it entirely. And Sterling and Ross gain substantial market share and a broader service portfolio without engaging in a destructive, all-out war that ultimately benefits no one but the liquidators. And Brandon Cole in this scenario? George asked, the unspoken question hanging heavily. That's the board's decision, George, I stated, though we both knew what the inevitable outcome would be for him. I have no personal interest in his future. My only concern is for the clients who deserve seamless service and for the many good employees at Innovatech who've been caught in the middle of his ill-conceived restructuring. George chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. You always were better at the long game, Michael, at seeing the whole chessboard, than anyone ever gave you credit for. It's a bold move. I'll present it to the board tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I can't promise anything, but it's a hell of a lot better than the trajectory they're on now. After hanging up with George, I immediately called Rebecca Sterling into my office and laid out the entire proposal. She listened intently, her sharp eyes missing no detail, occasionally making notes on a pad. This is unusually generous, Michael, she said when I'd finished. her expression thoughtful. We could, quite frankly, just wait another month or two and likely pick up the remaining valuable clients when Innovatech inevitably implodes under the weight of its losses. We could, I agreed, but that would hurt a lot of good people who work at Innovatech, people who don't deserve to lose their jobs because of one man's short-sighted arrogance. This way, both companies not only survive, but have the potential to thrive. The clients receive optimal, uninterrupted service, leveraging the best of both organizations, and nobody loses their livelihood because of a flawed cost-cutting strategy. It's a win-win-win. Rebecca studied me for a long moment, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. You really aren't doing any of this for revenge, are you? Revenge is wasteful, Rebecca, I said simply. It's a short-term satisfaction with long-term negative consequences. I'm interested in building something better, something sustainable. The next morning, my phone rang at precisely 9:45 a.m. It was George, calling directly from the Innovatech board meeting. "They're in," he said, his voice devoid of its usual gruffness, replaced by a tone of sheer relief. "Full partnership agreement, pending legal review, of course, and Brandon Cole has been asked to tender his resignation, effective immediately." "And the employees at Innovatech?" I asked, holding my breath. "No further restructuring," George confirmed. The board admitted they got too caught up in Cole's slick presentations and his vision of aggressive cost-cutting. They forgot what actually makes this business work. The people, the relationships. I thanked him, a profound weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right, about preserving value. Rebecca appeared in my doorway a moment later, eyebrows raised in question. "We have a deal," I told her. "Now we build something better than either company could have managed alone." She smiled, a genuine, broad smile. All because they underestimated the quiet guy who just nodded and walked away. 6 weeks later, I stood at the podium in Sterling and Ross's largest conference room, now temporarily rebranded for the joint announcement. I faced a crowd of familiar faces, clients from both legacy companies, Innovatech and Sterling and Ross board members, and staff from both organizations, many of whom looked visibly relieved. The partnership was being made official today. Brandon Cole, of course, wasn't there. Last I'd heard, he'd taken a position with a struggling startup down in Boise, Idaho, where perhaps his aggressive, cost-cutting approach might, ironically, be more appropriate for a company with little to lose. "Today marks the beginning of something unique in our industry," I said, my gaze sweeping across the gathered faces. "Not a merger, not an acquisition, but a true partnership. One built on the fundamental understanding that enduring business relationships are forged by people, for people, not by spreadsheets and algorithms." From the back of the room, I spotted George Maxwell, grinning proudly. Beside him stood Sarah and several other Innovatech employees who had been deeply worried about their futures just a few short weeks earlier. The partnership agreement was elegant in its simplicity. Clients could choose which entity would be their primary service provider, but would have seamless access to the specialized services of both. Revenue would be shared based on service utilization, and most importantly, the client relations teams from both companies would be unified under my leadership, ensuring consistency and quality. After the formal announcement, Robert Sterling from Apex Industries approached me, shaking his head in genuine amazement. "Michael, when you left Innovatech, I was ready to follow you anywhere," he said. "But this is even better. You turned getting fired into the best possible thing that could have happened for everyone involved, except perhaps for the guy who fired you." Eleanor Vance from Summit Enterprises joined us, nodding in agreement. "That young man never understood what he was throwing away, Michael," she said softly. "But we did. We always knew your worth." As the event wound down, Rebecca Sterling found me by the expansive windows overlooking the Denver skyline. "The Innovatech board and ours are calling it a masterstroke," she said. "In 6 short weeks, you've not only salvaged a dire situation, but transformed both companies and secured client loyalty that should last for years." I shook my head. I just reminded everyone of something they already knew deep down, Rebecca. Business isn't built on cutting corners or devaluing experience. It's built on trust, on consistent delivery, on relationships. And revenge? She asked, a slight knowing smile playing on her lips. Was that just a little part of it? I looked out over the city, a sense of calm settling over me. The best revenge wasn't taking the clients, Rebecca, I replied. It was showing everyone, including Innovatech, the right way to keep them. 1 month after the partnership announcement, I left the office a little early to meet Emily for dinner. She'd been following the whole saga with a mixture of filial pride and sheer amazement. So technically, Dad, she said, as we settled into our booth at her favorite Italian restaurant, you're now more powerful than you were before all this happened. I shrugged, a smile playing on my lips. It's not about power, Em. It's about doing things the right way, treating people with respect. Still, she persisted, a twinkle in her eye, the guy who fired you is gone. You've basically got 2 companies looking to you for leadership in client relations, and all your clients think you're some kind of business genius. I'm just a guy who answers his phone on weekends, sweetheart, I said, reaching for a breadstick. After dinner, I drove home to my quiet house, reflecting on the whirlwind journey of the past few months. From the sting of an unceremonious dismissal to unexpectedly reshaping an entire sector of Denver's business landscape, it had been quite a ride. It had never truly been about getting back at Brandon Cole. It had always been about proving that what I'd dedicated 15 years to building, those relationships, that trust, had real, lasting value. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find a small, neatly wrapped package on my desk. Inside was a framed photograph. It was of the original Pioneer Tech Services team, just George Maxwell, myself, and 2 other young hopefuls, standing proudly in front of that tiny, windowless first office all those years ago. The note accompanying it, in George's familiar scrawl, read simply, "People sign contracts with people, Michael. Never forget that. George." I placed the frame on my desk where clients would see it when they visited, a tangible reminder of where it all started, and more importantly, why it all mattered. Later that day, I had a series of back-to-back meetings with clients, a mix from both the legacy Innovatech and Sterling and Ross portfolios. Not crisis management, not damage control, just the regular, constructive, relationship-building conversations that had been my specialty for over 15 years. As I picked up the phone to make my first call, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. A sense of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Not the fleeting thrill of winning a corporate battle, but the deep contentment that comes from knowing that doing business the right way, the human way, still mattered. In the end, Brandon Cole had done me an enormous favor. By trying to replace me with someone cheaper, he'd inadvertently orchestrated a situation that proved, beyond any doubt, just how valuable experience, loyalty, and genuine human connection really were. And that, I thought, was a lesson worth every challenging minute of the journey. Thank you so much for joining us on Life Stories for Michael's incredible journey of resilience and strategic brilliance. We hope his story inspires you to recognize your own value and the power of genuine connections. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please don't forget to hit that like button, and most importantly, subscribe to Life Stories so you won't miss our next episode. We appreciate your support.